When we're starting to code in Python, one of the earliest things we need to do is perform some mathematical function. Now, we've already seen in the last video that we can create variables. And in this one, we're going to create a program, just the lines of code, that's going to work out the perimeter of a rectangle. So this is going to work out how far it is to walk all the way around a rectangle. Now, to do that, I know I need two measurements. I need the height of the rectangle and I need the width of the rectangle. And then I need to calculate the perimeter. So I'm going to need at least two variables. The first one is going to be height. And as we did before, I'm going to create the variable. This is called initialization. I'm going to create the variable. I know it's going to store a number, not string. This time it's a number. So I'm going to stick 0. That's going to tell it that this is going to hold any whole number. Height is equal to 0. So this is called an integer. Now I'm going to write that up, but it won't work. So please just notice integer. That's what this is. But that word was purely so you could see the word I'm using. Height is equal to 0. If I set it to 0, then height is created in my computer's memory and it's holding the value 0. But much more important than that, height knows now that that's going to be storing only whole numbers. 0, any positive number and negative number. So that's a good thing. Now I pressed enter, nothing's happened. I'm going to create my second variable. Again, it's going to be holding a whole value, so it's an integer. I've called it width because I want these to be descriptive of what I've got. And this is setting it up again, just like height, width is going to hold a whole number, 0, positive or negative. I'm going to need a third one. These two I need to ask the user to supply me. The third one is where I'm going to store the answer. Now, as I said at the beginning, I want it to store the perimeter of a rectangle, the perimeter, the distance around the edge. So I'm going to create a variable called perimeter and again set it to 0. That's going to hold the answer. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take height and I'm going to ask the user to input the height of their rectangle. And I'm going to put 9. I've asked for the height. I'm now going to ask the system to do the width. So same 9, except it's now supplying the data to the width and is asking for the width. I'm going to say 5. The next thing I'm going to do is the calculation. Oops, can't spell perimeter. There we go. Now, I could do it this way. I know that the perimeter is equal to going up the height, along the width, down the height, and along the width again. That's going to give me the distance around the parameter, up, across, down, and back to the start again. If I notice I've got 2 lots of height and 2 lots of width, so actually I know that I can cut that down to 2 times height plus width. And then I can delete all of that. It's the same calculation, 2 times. The spaces are for me. The computer doesn't care if I have spaces there or don't have spaces there. I can delete all spaces if I really got emotional about it. It doesn't matter, but I'm not going to. It's easier for me to read it. Gone to the end of the line, made sure the cursor's there, and pressed enter. Now, Let's have a look at what I've done. I've asked the user to enter their height, and I've asked the computer to store their answer in height. Now I'm the user, I've put in 9, so height is now holding the value 9. I've then asked the user for the width, and I'm going to assign that value to width. So I then ran the program and I gave it the number 5. That means width is 5. So height was set to 9, width was set to 5. I've now asked perimeter to be equal to 2 times my height plus width. Well, height was 9, width was 5, so 9 plus 5, and the brackets get processed first, BIDMAS rules apply. 9 plus 5 is 14, times 2, 14 times 2 is 28. So perimeter will now be holding the value 28. Let's prove that to ourselves. Just what we saw before, perimeter, your rectangle has a perimeter of, and then our variable that we've got holding this value. I'm going to press enter, and if we've got this right, it should be 28. Now that's interesting. It's not 28, it's 9595. Well, the fault here is actually back to my input lines. If you remember in the previous video, we stored data as a string, and input commands only take in strings from the keyboard. Your keyboard has letters and numbers. If you ever look at your keyboard now, you can see letters and numbers and symbols and patterns and all kinds of things. You could press any key that you want. So the computer waits to see what keys you pressed. So the input would always return a string. Now, though we've told height that we want it to be a number, Python doesn't hold rigidly to this. So it will allow us to change the data type. So in this case, when I've typed in the answers, it goes into height as a string. So when I typed in 9, though it looks like a number to me and to yourself, to the computer, it's just a symbol, a pattern. When I typed in 5, the same thing. So I've told it to join in this line here where it says perimeter equals. I've asked it to join 9 and 5 together and then do that twice. 9 and 5 twice. It's done exactly what I've told it to do, but not what I wanted it to do. So I need to change my lines of code. So I'm going to rewrite one of my lines. Not input. I'm going to start off with int. And now I'm going to put my input. Remember the 2 brackets at the end. That's always where people make the most common mistake. So what have I got here? I've still got my height, and here's my input, so that's not changed. That's exactly the same as it was up here. But I've now got this int that's wrapped around the input, and what that says is the input will run first. Oh, I can't spell, please, I've just noticed that. The input will run first, so the computer will do what it did on the line above, which is ask for input from the key. So when I put 9 and I press enter this time, again it will be a string that the computer accepts. But the very next thing it will do is this int, and what that means is it will convert whatever I type into a whole number. So when I type 9, the computer will take the 9 from the input, and the very next command will convert it from the symbol 9 into the value 9 and store that. Now I do the same to the width. Again, I need to convert the integer part. again, there's the inputs, just as we had, exactly the same as we had before. Int converts this string into a whole number and stores it in width. My calculation remains the same. And enter. And now let's see what the result is. It's always where you hope everything you've typed in has worked. $28, which is the answer we're looking for, because this time the values have been taken in as a string but converted to an integer and stored in the variable. Then those two values have actually been identified as the values multiplied by 2, and that's stored in the perimeter, and that's calculated here. It's worth noting the following, by the way. I'm going to retype our height line. Users can be tricky people. Oops, I put 2 speech marks, that's why the text stayed black. So please enter the height of the rectangle. So this is exactly the same. I can't get the spelling correct. There you go. It's exactly the same as the line above. Identical to it. I don't want that to change. What I want to show you is when I press enter, if you remember, I can put anything into the keyboard. So I could have put A or 9 or pound symbol. In fact, that's what I'm going to do. Let's put the pound symbol in. Now that's not going to make any sense when we do the calculation. And actually, when we do the int part, what's going to happen is this should crash. Crash means come up with an error, because the input string, which is pound, should become an integer. Might not. Let's see what happens. And there's the error. It can't convert the pound symbol into a number because it's not a number. It's the pound symbol. The pound symbol does not appear in our numbers 0 to 9. Therefore, it generated an error. These are all in immediate mode. The next thing we're going to have a look at will make sense of how I don't have to keep writing the same lines of code over and over again when I make a mistake. So we'll see that one on the next video.